The Northwest home for paranormal. You're listening to U.S. Phenomenon with your host, Mario Magana.
From the Pacific Northwest in the shadow of the 1962 World's Fair, the Space Needle, this is U.S. Phenomenon. I'm your host, Mario Magana, where we explore the extraordinary and the unexplained. In this episode, we will discover and we will cover everything, all UFO, all UAPs. Our guest tonight is no stranger to this. He's an author, an independent journalist, a radio talk show host, a former talk show host, a former Senate staff member. His articles have appeared in many different places, including the New York Times, the Esquire, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Idaho Statesman, and the Pacific Sun. A UFO observer, a reporter, Keith Thompson has spent decades researching and investigating UFO encounters and other unknown aerial phenomena, leading us to this book, The UFO Paradox. And let me put this up here real quick. I want to get this in here so we can get this. The UFO Paradox, the celestial and symbolic world of unidentified aerial phenomenons. It is my pleasure to introduce and welcome to U.S. Phenomenon, Keith Thompson. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mario. It's great to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
You know, it's interesting when we discuss these things. I know there's a lot of skeptics out there, right? There's a lot of people who don't really understand this. And how far back does this go for you? Like the passion and you doing the research prior to, doing your normal daily job?
Well, that's a great question. A good place to start. I've been following this for quite a long time. Rather unexpectedly, I started out when I was 12 years old in the 6th grade. I did not see a UFO, but it was my turn to give a current events report in our classroom. That is to say, follow a news story. Each of us had that assignment. And when it was our turn, we'd come and stand in front of the class. Maybe we would have news clippings or other props, depending on what the story was about, and then tell the class a story, almost like a reporter. So at that time, living in Northwest Ohio, there was a fairly legendary, now that we can look back on it, UFO sighting in Hillsdale, Michigan. And it was on the national news for like 3 or 4 days in a row because it was a continuous sighting. It was called, as the phrase is often used, was a UFO flap, a period in which UFOs are seen, lights in the sky, apparent objects, interactions, the whole 9 yards. So I told the story about how this was reported, and it came to be my turn, at the end of the report, it was my time to take questions from class members. And one of them I can still remember very well said, "What do you think they saw?" And I said, "I don't know." But I pointed out that there had been a report that it might have been only swamp gas, because swamp gas is a phenomenon that occurs around swamps and bogs where outgassing can become luminous, catch on fire. And so there are often lights in a swamp. Well, that it did not explain the story very well. So I said to my classmate, I said, "I don't know what they saw, but it sure didn't sound like swamp gas." Covered the whole story. At that point, my teacher came up in front of the class with me. Her name was Mrs. Lowry. She said something that I can still remember as if she said it today. She said to the class, "I think what Keith is telling us here is that it's important to keep an open mind and ask relevant questions." And then she turned to me and spoke to me in the way that teachers often do to the students. She called me by my full name. She said, "Mr. Thompson, that was a great report. You have the makings of a reporter, or maybe a scientist, possibly even a detective." And then she said with enthusiasm, "Follow the evidence wherever it leads on any topic." I couldn't have had a better assignment from a news director if I were a journalist. I went on to become a journalist, it happened. So I chose the reporter designation rather than scientist or detective. Although, as you can imagine, all three have something in common. Detectives try to find out who did it. And a smart detective doesn't say, "Well, I'm going to exclude him because he's a friend of mine." No, that sometimes your friend is the culprit. And a scientist doesn't rule out of bounds or off the table certain phenomena simply because it doesn't make sense. It tries to incorporate the phenomenon or to decide what it is. And likewise with the journalist, you're really supposed to sort of put everything in the story and let the readers decide for themselves. That's a pretty high standard these days. That doesn't get followed that much. So that's how I got interested. I can't say I became a UFO investigator that day or a full-time researcher, but it was in my mind from that point on. I knew that there was a basic pattern. Basic pattern in UFO sightings, Mario, is something like this. Ordinary, credible people report extraordinary, incredible sightings. And as they do, they're almost instantly responded to by official agents of culture, whether it's science, media, academia. And instead of showing curiosity about what people are reporting, even though it doesn't fit our existing frameworks, the response very typically is, well, that couldn't have happened. That wasn't seen. It was probably a misidentification of some celestial object like,
Sure.
the moon, or this is maybe a hoax. So I've learned by getting to know UFO witnesses the pressures they face to keep their stories to themselves because they can become a laughing stock.
It's interesting when you say that too, because I was just going to ask you. It's like maybe more now since the pandemic, this seems to be more of a foresight. I know that there is I think there's a hearing coming out this week for those that are listening to the podcast, or if you're listening to us on the terrestrial radio, that has already happened. But if you're listening to the podcast, I believe this week, right, there is a huge hearing that is coming out about UFOs, UAPs, which I know that they have the designation for unidentified flying objects versus unidentified. See, right, UAP as the designation. Are they still both? Or are we still now? Is it moved to UAP moving forward?
That's part of the quandary of all of this, Mario. Good question. Is there a difference? The main difference is the UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, was considered at this point a little less charged with symbolic meanings. Maybe people would not necessarily assume it meant little green man, for aliens, but it was considered more neutral. But it was created by the Pentagon because in 2017, the New York Times outed the Pentagon, which had been saying for really decades that there's nothing to this phenomenon. There's nothing in the sky that's not conventional, that doesn't belong there. So go home, people, return to your lives. We're the Air Force. We know what's going on in the sky. But it turns out, no, a task force existed in the Pentagon, secret, no longer secret, thanks to the New York Times. It had been studying the phenomena. So yeah, you're right. Now this week, November 11, for those who are hearing this afterwards, a hearing will be held. I'll speak of it in the future because it hasn't happened yet. It'll be a House congressional, the congressional side, the House side of Congress, I should say, is having a joint meeting of two committees. Four witnesses are going to testify. The question is how much empirical evidence is really going to come out of this. What often happens in previous hearings, and for example, a year ago, a witness will say, I have concluded that yes, we have, based on the evidence I've heard and the sources I've spoken to, yes, the U.S. is in possession of spacecraft, non-human spacecraft and non-human biological material. Can you tell us where this is being held? No, not in public session. Well, can you tell us where? What exactly? No, not in public session. Have you seen it yourself? No, but I've talked to very credible people. You're kind of seeing where I'm leading. Sure. I'm not questioning their integrity or their sincerity. If you're under a secrecy oath, you better obey it. You better abide by it.
Sure.
So when they say, I can't tell you in public session, they can't tell you in public session. But it leaves a big gap between the claim and the proof of the claim or the outing. So whether that's going to be the same after this hearing is yet to be determined.
And I know that your book, Keith Thompson, the author of the UFO paradox and the celestial and symbolic world of UAPs, I didn't have a full chance to listen to it. I was cramming as much as I possibly can. I tongue-in-cheek have talked about this on this show a ton, that the Pacific Northwest is the home of UFOs, UAPs, the first sightings because of the Kenneth Arnold thing. Everyone talks about how, oh, Roswell. I'm like, no, it happened here first. And maybe there are other encounters that have happened, but I kind of want to puff my chest and say, hey, the Pacific Northwest is home to the most paranormal UFO sightings, obviously with Kenneth Arnold going way back in the day.
Exactly. I'm also a student of mythology. I love the Greek myths and other mythologies of cultures as a way to learn about the psyche of other people. And in mythology, a creation myth is the myth that a people, especially an indigenous people, will tell about themselves, or for that matter, modern people who hold the Bible dear, the
Sure.
Old Testament. There's a creation story in there called Genesis that tells the story of how things came to be. The reason I mention creation stories is that you're right. The UFO phenomenon's creation story took place with Kenneth Arnold's sighting in June of 1947 while he was flying over the beautiful Mount Rainier, one of the greatest mountains in North America. He saw 9 objects flying in formation at fantastic speed, great altitude. He was able to clock all of that because he was a very skilled pilot, private pilot, but had professional standing, or I should say skill level. He reported that they flew as if saucers were skipping over water. He referred to the motion of the way they moved, not specifically to the shape, but of course the way that was mangled by the news media at the time. It was
Sure.
reported that he saw objects shaped like saucers. In any case, the most interesting thing, Mario, happened many decades later after Kenneth Arnold had passed away. And by the way, after he'd spent many years being associated with the flying saucers. It didn't do his career and his social standing much good to be associated with something that was considered kooky by many. On the other hand, he got hundreds and thousands of letters from people who said, I saw this stuff too, so I need you to verify it for me. Well, he wasn't in the business of doing that either. He was the wrong man in the wrong place, you might say, or maybe the right man in the right place. But here's the interesting thing. After he died, his daughter, Kim Arnold, came forward I believe it was around the 1990s, maybe the late 80s. She appeared on a national radio show and she told the host, she goes, I'm coming forward because my father asked me to do this eventually. I'm coming forward to tell the rest of the story that he didn't tell. My father was always astonished at the idea that he had reported nuts and bolts technological craft. That's never what he said. What he told us, his family members, was that these objects moved, that they seemed to be breathing, they seemed to be pulsating, and they had various density. They were blue-white light, and they had various densities from opaque to translucent, changing their shape and form, and according to Ken Arnold, to his daughter, beating almost to the rhythm of the human heart. He also said to her, Kim, it was like, I didn't think it was from another place, other galaxies. I thought it was from another dimension that's always right here. It felt to me, Kim, like these objects were somehow related to what we call death, where we go when we leave this world. Now, regardless of the factual, whether that's a good interpretation on his part, that was his deep intuitive sense, not that it was like spacecraft or high tech, but it was like almost a living organism that was changing its shape and form and heart and seemed related to death. So it's more as if this was a religious experience rather than an extraterrestrial experience. If it had been reported in the terms which he kept to himself, by the way, the details he just provided, he was not interested in going public with that. It was bad enough to be associated with something goofy like flying saucers. Okay, there's one additional detail that really just messes things up, but I mean that in a good sense because it makes us open up to the full range of data. When he returned to Boise, Idaho that night, which is where he and his family lived, he was at Mount Rainier. He flew back home from his day's work, landed at the airport, got in the car, drove to his neighborhood. When he came into his house and got settled, suddenly there appeared in the house orbs of light, ORBS, round balls of light, blue, red, yellow, suggestive of paranormal phenomena. Some phenomenon that had never appeared in their home before and certainly made no sense outside of a spiritual or paranormal display was suddenly appearing in the house. And again, he didn't report that either. So whatever he encountered, you may say, in geographically, Mount Rainier that day, it connected him to a larger field of reality, such that it followed him home. It went home with him. It hitchhiked, if you will.
Sure.
So that's a part that has never been told about the opening story of the contemporary flying saucer phenomenon. And I write about this in the book. So what that requires is that we open our minds to the idea that to whatever degree the creation myth of UFOs is very different from what we've thought, then this whole phenomenon, to the degree that we assume it must be extraterrestrial in the Steven Spielberg Close Encounters of the Third Kind sense, tells us more about what Hollywood and how Hollywood likes to portray this, and how that may be different from what the actual phenomenon is in many cases.
There's so much when you talk about Kenneth Arnold's time back in the 40s, late 40s. I mean, I'm sure that was a strictly, I mean, that got to be the biggest taboo thing. And then you go back and you think about this piece too, the incident that happened at Maury Island, the Maury Island incident that was, I mean, some people think it was a hoax and maybe it wasn't. And you know, how these men in black started to show up to investigate. Was this because there was all these sightings that were starting to happen, that were Kenneth's sightings, this incident, Roswell, these things started to add up? The government had to probably spin something up to move forward to say, what is going on out here?
Yeah, it really begins the whole question of whether we can trust what our government has told us. And I think by and large, we cannot trust it. There has been deliberate disinformation. Now, however, just to say it, there's been disinformation. You know, disinformation almost invariably depends for its success on there being kernels of truth in a larger fabric of mistruth. If a cover story for a phenomenon had no details that were accurate, it wouldn't be believable. So a good disinformation approach is to take certain details that happen, but place it in a larger category of facts in order to keep it from connecting, keep people from perceiving. So why has the government taken this stand of essentially poo-pooing this phenomenon, disregarding it? There are two clear hypotheses. One is they know what it is, and they don't want us to know because they're afraid we'd be freaked out. That's basically it, society. The other is maybe they don't know. And in which other area of government competence is it considered a good idea for government officials to say things like, come out and hold a news conference, especially if you're a military official with a chest of ribbons, right, and medals.
Sure, right.
You're the top guy from the Department of Defense or Joint Chiefs of Staff. You're not going to give a news conference that says, yes, there is something flying in our airspace with impunity at enormous velocity, conducting right angle turns, disappearing on the spot, reappearing someplace else. We don't know what it is, but we'll keep you posted. No, that's not going to be told. So I think that there's a large hypothesis, a large reason I personally give a lot of credit to the idea that this phenomenon, whatever it is so far beyond our kin that they don't know what it is either, except that it has enormous advantages in terms of speed and technological prowess and the ability to conduct maneuvers. So it could be extraterrestrial, but if so, apparently we're under observation. It could be extra dimensional, like the Twilight Zone.
Sure.
It could be from other dimensions of beyond time and space as we know. You know, I think what this phenomenon is telling us at minimum is we don't understand time and space very well. Even without the UFO phenomenon, there are really vital debates going on right now around quantum physics about time and space. And our preliminary thinking has evolved a lot since Einstein, to put it simply. So we're very far from understanding this, to put it simply.
When you think about the technology and the advancements of what technology has become since the 1900s, from the buggy wagons and the automobile engines, and now moving into the stealth mode of, the B-2 bombers and things of that nature. Do excuse me, do we think that maybe there may have been an inkling of reverse engineering into some of this UAP UFO type, if there was a crash that happened, that they reverse engineered possibly to get graphite, to get some of these metals or these different rare things to bring us up to speed? Is that something that you think may be a path to where we would say the path to technology?
Well, up to speed is a great figure of speech. I love it. Getting us up to speed, right? Um, about a year and a half ago, a former military official named David Grush, Grusch, came forward and revealed, after his own personal investigations into this phenomenon, as with using military intelligence clearance that allowed him to talk to people, supposedly, and I always say supposedly and allegedly, he talked to real people. That's not the supposed part. I don't think there's any doubt that David Grush really dug deep, made contact with people who did tell him things. And they claimed things like, I know those who are on the inside who are working with this material, or I myself am on the inside, but I don't have whistleblower status. I have the same security clearance issues you do. You can't quote me by name, and I can't, it's the understanding. Well, so Grush said he has been told there are at least 12 recovered craft, some of which are in pristine condition. So they didn't crash. They're like, was it, it's hard to say. Let's assume it's true.
Sure.
Were they given to us? Was there a trade? Did they abandon them? Did they abandon a ship and go off in another ship? Allegedly, in pristine condition. Secondly, the thing that a good skeptic might say, not necessarily a debunker, how is it that these craft are always, is it only on military land? How come they never land in and this is not meant to debunk or ridicule.
Right.
The question, how come it doesn't behave this way, is very often used to dismiss the whole thing. So I'm very careful when I raise those questions. But it is interesting that somehow they always land or are captured, or the crash material is recovered on ground where the military gets in so fast that there's nobody domestically to confirm. Now, with Roswell, I want to be very clear. There's a good case of, it's clear something crashed at Roswell. The government has held to this idea that it was a certain kind of meteorological balloon. They've changed their story a few times. By the way, they officially came out when it crashed. They said, we have recovered one of the discs, one of these discs that have been talked about, these UFOs. We've recovered one. Then the next day, they backed off. They said, no, that was a misinterpretation. It turned out to be a weather balloon. Well, right there, did they put out the UFO story knowing that they were going to retract it? Why would you lead with the fact that it was a UFO, a craft, a disc, and then pull back? Unless one hypothesis about Roswell is they actually were happy to use the UFO cover story, because what was actually recovered was either something top secret on our side or something top secret that had come through Russia and we'd gotten hold of. In other words, we might have been considered something of our own ownership that we wanted to hide, so we were willing to call it a flying saucer. Again, something crashed, and there's also very good evidence that the military went door to door in the Roswell area, knocking on doors saying, have you picked up any of the crash from the crash field? No, sir. If you have, and you're not telling the truth, you'll get in very serious trouble. Now, remember, this is the late 1940s. The World War II had just ended. We were just entering this very frightening Cold War period with Russia, the Soviet Union, who had just been our ally, now was our mortal enemy. To be told that kind of, you would really think twice about keeping stuff under your bed if you'd recovered metallic foil or something. So anyway, the Roswell case at this point, I think it's almost too deep a rabbit hole to get into. But as far as David Grush, I think his claims will probably be vetted again. He himself is not speaking at the hearing, I don't think. Whether he'll be there or not is an open question. But whether there has been any further, specification, are there dates, people, locations? where this material is being held, physical material as well as biological material. By the way, he claims what he's told is that we have offloaded the material to the aerospace corporations. They're almost like quasi-government. McDonnell Douglas and Lockheed Martin are so much a part of our national security apparatus. They're almost like nation states in and of themselves. So the idea is McDonnell Douglas does have it, or other aerospace companies. And yes, they are attempting to back engineer it, and they may have already succeeded in back engineering. I put it all very tentatively because I don't know. I don't think many people who claim to know don't know either, but they promote the ideas.
It's interesting. Someone who worked at Boeing in 1997, 98, 99, having to work on a unmanned drone plane back in those days was called Dark Star, made out of graphite. And at that point, that's when the Boeing McDonnell Douglas merger happened. And obviously Boeing was in need of McDonnell Douglas because of them not being fared well as to the military contracts. And they thought if they merged with McDonnell Douglas, they would have a better chance at some of these military contracts. I.e., fast forward, we're talking about 97. Now my plane, I no longer work at Boeing. I work, after I got laid off, I went back to school, got into media. But this is the interesting piece that, us working with graphite and, this plane, this unmanned plane was going to be stealth. It was, and that's what it was there for. We were building a stealth version of the B-2 bomber with graphite. Quite interesting stuff to work with in the advanced composites world. And it looked like black hair, looked like jet black hair, these fibers that were pre-impregnated with the catalyst to cure the graphite. And when it was done, after we laid it up and put it in a tool to mold into this wing set, we sent it to the autoclave to get cured and cooked, and off to manufacturing, and the plane went. But fast forward to moving to the technology, it is interesting to me to think about that, and it shows to us why a lot of us out here are very skeptical of the government, to say, oh, the retraction of some of these stories, is the government hiding something from us? Was it a balloon? Was it Russia's, during that Cold War time? To think if it was Russia's, you would think that Russia would say, oh yeah, hey, by the way, we lost something. But maybe they didn't, because they knew that that could trigger, World War III. And they're like, well, we're not going to say, don't ask, don't tell type of situation. Fast forwarding to moving to now, we're with the whole pandemic, everyone's seeing something. And then the Tic Tac thing comes out. And now we're talking about evidence that is all over YouTube. I mean, these videos and these pilots, sharing this information that finally was released, or maybe unclassified. Maybe you might want to shed some more light in that regards. To the average Joe, and to the average person who may be out there who's never had an experience of seeing anything remotely close to anything other than, oh, look, there goes all this, Starlink satellites, or, I just saw the space station go by. For those who are skeptical of UFOs, UAPs, is this something this Tic Tac thing, is this thing, what are we seeing here? I mean, is this a hoax? Is this possibly some stealth new military, phenomenon that maybe we're looking at? Or was that really UFO stuff? Was that something that we see now and we're like, wow, that is the first evidence that is like raw, pure, not something in the sky, that it is actually recorded for infamy. It's there for the entire world to see now.
Well, you've just touched on all the, your question contains all the hypotheses, beautifully put. There's no doubt there's a physical, these objects are physical objects by our criteria. They appear on radar, they appear on other sensors, they leave a heat signature, a thermal imprint consistent with an object geometrically, than any other kind of object would pass muster. They leave ground indentations, burn marks on witnesses, and at the same time, the paradox, that's why I call the book the UFO paradox. The paradox, or the contradiction, is these same craft or objects, apparent craft, but certainly objects that do appear, various shapes, saucer shaped, triangle shaped, balloon shaped, cigar shaped, just about every shape has been reported. So it raises a question about the degree to which individual witnesses, through the filters that they bring, are seeing something but imposing their own interpretations on it. Something is there. In any case, these same apparent objects then disappear on the spot, or they break into balls of light, like in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You may remember that highway scene coming around the corner, and the lights, orbs. The orbs are very commonly reported. So the idea of full-blown Spielberg-type craft, those are sometimes reported, but a whole range of luminous phenomena. And is there something about the light, the nature of the light, that causes an altered state of consciousness in the witness? So they're seeing something, but it takes over the consciousness of the witness through the logic that it imposes. I think there is a logic to this intelligence, and I think it is an intelligence. I would grant that. I just don't know that it's strictly speaking an extraterrestrial intelligence. It has parallels to what we call poltergeists. Now, people say, oh, well, why bring poltergeists in? We're talking about UFOs.
Right.
But what's the question? What is a UFO? And what is a poltergeist? A poltergeist actually does appear to be a real phenomenon, manifestations of phantasms of light and energy that are often related to unresolved emotional issues in a household. That's why in horror stories, the poltergeist is generally a haunted house, because a family might have unresolved family trauma. And it is thought that that in some way evokes or gets externalized. So is this phenomenon real, but in some way closely connected to our own psyche, the collective psyche? Is it like a thermostat that's reading us and then projecting images of ourselves in some way?
And when you talk about this, the first thing that came to my mind was the movie Men in Black, where they took I take my pen here, and they're like, okay, take a look at this, and they're like, psh. That's what I feel like you're describing to us, to the average listener who may not understand. Is that kind of the same thing where it's
Yeah, and by the way,
right?
if you've only seen the movie Men in Black versions 1, 2, and 3, I guess by now, I don't know how many
Yeah,
movies
right.
have been made in the franchise, it appears to be comic and ludicrous. But if you really delve deeply into the research on the Men in Black phenomena, it would very often happen like this. Somebody would see in the early sightings, 1950s, 1960s, somebody would see a UFO, and then, or from their home, or they'd see it out in a field, and then they drive home, put the car in the garage, go about their business. There comes a knock on the door. They open the door, and there are two men, usually two or three. They're wearing ill-fitting black suits. They have pasty skin. Their eyes seem a little unfocused. They seem a little robotic. And the witness who opens the door to them feels almost as if they are under the influence of something. It's something strange. And the Men in Black say, Mr. Jones, did you see anything strange today on your way home? Okay, now right there. If there are men, whatever form they're in, whatever they're made of, are they human? Are they non-human? Are they agents of the same intelligence coming to, like a trickster phenomenon? If you saw the sighting earlier in the day and they come to your home and say, did you see anything strange today? It would be best not to tell anyone about it. And then they attempt to smile. That doesn't make any sense. So it's almost like a secondary effect. You've seen something strange in the sky that caught your psyche. Did you bring it home with you and somehow lure these apparent agents? And are they human agents? I know this sounds absurd. I would never even have considered such a thing, except I got permission from my 6th grade teacher who said, follow the evidence wherever it leads. So I report on phenomena, what people report. I don't believe it or disbelieve it, but I make notes and I bring it forward. And put the reports in circulation, and I hear from people all around everywhere. I get letters and emails saying, "Dear Mr. Thompson, can you help me understand what I've seen?" Well, the answer generally, no, I can't help you understand it, but I can at least give you a pat on the back and say, I can encourage you not just to lie to yourself. You had a real experience. Whatever you saw, I don't know what the source of it is. Something can manifest, materialize, and then dematerialize or demanifest, almost like turning off a TV set, and it resolves into a dot on the screen and then goes black. I can't explain that, but I can give you a little pat on the back and say, you've seen something, you've experienced something, and be mindful who you talk to it about. Not because you're going to get men in black at your doorstep, but because everybody knows. I'll give you a good example. The movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind opens with that famous scene. Air traffic controllers are talking with three different pilots out there, TWA, Pan Am, and American, I think. And they all are reporting something that shouldn't be in the sky. Is this one of ours? Is this one of yours, TWA? The tower says, we don't have anything up there. But we see it as well. We see something. We see it on radar. Do you want to report this, TWA? Do you want to report an unidentified flying object? And there's a pause, and the response comes back, negative.
Yeah.
And then he goes to each of the other pilots. Do you want to report it? No, sir. Negative. And the third pilot says, I wouldn't know what to report. Now, what was being said in that? Well, these were three wise pilots who already knew that if they were to report a UFO, that will be translated as, oh, pilot claims to see spaceship. No, an unidentified flying object is a description. Interpretation is spaceship. So it would be reported that they saw a spaceship, and their neighbors would want to know, did you see the little green men too? They knew that they didn't want any such connection. Well, that's the way witnesses are. They pay a big price for coming forward. I'm often asked, given your research, do you recommend that I tell people about my own experience, whatever their experience was? And I generally respond, don't tell the world, don't hold a news conference, don't necessarily go on a podcast interview unless you feel that's your true calling, but tell somebody in your life, maybe your counselor, a member of your family, your mother, your father, your priest, your pastor, your counselor. There are all kinds of people, but don't unburden yourself. Yes, share it with somebody who's not going to mock you, but will help you hang out with this, help hang out with the mystery, because that's what it is.
It's interesting because you think a pilot holds a high regards to a job title, right? Very well educated. You come out and say, hey, by the way, I saw this, unidentified flying object. They're like, oh, woo, like you said, little green man, you saw whatever. Our guest this evening, Keith Thompson, the author of The UFO Paradox, The Celestial and Symbolic World of the UAP. I got to ask you this. I recently did a radio show podcast about a guy who's been abducted for the last 50 years of his life. Where does abduction fall into your book here in regards to how many people have you encountered who have shared stories with you? Our guy talks about the gray. He really goes into the depth. The story is so crazy that people ask me when I interviewed him, do you believe his story, Mario? And my answer to them is, that is his truth. Why do I not believe him? I've never had, no one's ever taken me anywhere. Well, that's not true, but I've never been taken to a spaceship where I'm like, oh, hey, by the way, I was taken by the Greys, blah, 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 blah. This is his story that he shared with us, and quite grateful that he was able to share his story. In your book, how many do you talk about encounters? People
in abductions. Yes, I do talk about abductions. I even have a chapter called the Alien Abduction Impasse. And by that, and to give you kind of cut to the chase, I think there is an impasse in the subject because there isn't clarity on how to explain it. But I put it this way. I've never had a UFO abduction. My goodness, I've never seen anything. And for that matter, I've never seen a UFO. I've never seen anything in the sky that struck me as anomalous. So it's just for my own background. I don't comment. I've had experiences, however, of non-ordinary paranormal experiences that broaden my perspective about what is real, but just not specifically the UFO phenomenon. In any case, what I've come to conclude about the abductions is, are they real? Do they really happen? Are these real events in real time? And I always say, if you or I had the same experience, we would believe it was real. What I'm referring to is as the experiences as reported by the experiencers. They're describing something that is not merely psychological, according to any psychological syndrome. That question has been asked exhaustively, including by the late Dr. John Mack of Harvard, who fatefully got interested in the abduction subject and studied it, and ended up getting in trouble at Harvard, because Harvard would come to him and say, Dr. Mack, John, we don't want this subject. And Mack would say to his colleagues, who were from likewise men and women of science, who apparently, hopefully had signed on precisely to ask difficult questions and not take things on faith or push them off the table in advance because, well, that couldn't be true. Dr. Mack said, the consistency of the reports, the consistency of the details, people being taken out of their beds, out of their cars, levitated, they experienced being levitated by a beam of light. Again, at surface level, these are absurd. This is ludicrous. And I say that surface level, put those words in quote, absurd, ludicrous. We know that doesn't happen, says the debunker. The debunker pretends to be a skeptic, but a debunker is generally the person who the media turns to, and he or she will say things, well, we know from the laws of science that these things don't happen. It couldn't happen. We know the laws of science. Well, the laws of science are as accurate and up to date as they are. There was a time when in the 1700s, villagers were reporting fiery rocks coming from the sky, and would report it to the men of science, and they'd laugh. Oh, the villagers must have had too much mead last night, too much beer. They're reporting fiery rocks in the sky. Turns out there were fiery rocks called meteors, and they would land, and they would have burn marks. At first, the scientists thought, well, the villagers are burning the rocks and claiming they fell from the sky. So, yes, that didn't happen until it was allowed to happen through a scientific explanation. So, back to abductions. I don't know. I can't tell you how to explain where they're from, what the source of them is, but there is a consistency to the details that the answer is yes, they're real because they happen. But there are also perplexing details, aspects of it, that make it easy for debunkers to say, well, what about that? Well, what about that part? So it's easy to find things that don't fit our normal sense of reality. And that makes it easy to forget that very often our sense of reality is temporary. It's tentative. It's provisional. For example, Galileo, using his computations and a device called a telescope, came to the startling conclusion that the Earth circles around the sun. The sun doesn't orbit around the Earth. He began to broadcast this, so to speak, in his community, and he got a knock on the door from the authorities of the time, from the Vatican, which was before science was fully developed. The Vatican called the shots on what's real and not. They told the astronomer Galileo, no, that isn't true. The Earth, stop saying the Earth spins around the sun, or we'll put you under house arrest. And he said, don't take my word for it. He was wonderfully naive, you might say, in believing if you just use my own empirical methods, you can see for yourself. Look at my computations over my table and then use my telescope. They said no. They famously refused to look through the telescope, which would have given them the same information. So that's an example of human blinders. Not being willing to look through the telescope is now a metaphor for all the ways in which modern science says, well, that couldn't be. We know it couldn't be paranormal. There is no such thing as the paranormal, telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, except it's widely reported. We've all had experiences that are far beyond chance, about synchronicities. I think of my old friend Jim from high school. Haven't seen him since high school. I'm going to call Jim one of these days, I say. Next thing, the phone is ringing. Pick it up. He goes, Keith, you won't believe it. It's me, Jim from high school. Yeah, I do believe it, Jim. I was kind of just thinking about you this week. We write that off to coincidence, but Coincidence is the term for the connections that happen between the mental realm and the physical realm that aren't supposed to happen. There's not supposed to be meaningful coincidences where you have a thought of an owl, you open the curtains, and there's an owl on your porch that's never been there before. Those are called callings. We get callings from the universe. And in fact, I say the UFO is a calling from the cosmos to expand our maps, to create better maps that include phenomena that we haven't yet explained, but which is interacting with us even as we speak.
Our guest, Keith Thompson, an author of the wonderful book, The UFO Paradox, The Celestial and Symbolic World of UAPs. We're going to get really interesting because I know you were just talking about the church business there, and how they used to be, astrologers back in the day. And I know that we did a show long ago called Church versus the Stars. Quite an interesting podcast. So we thank Karis Astrology for that. What's interesting to me is that, we'll get into the religion piece, and this may be for a lot of Christians or people that are religious, this may be interesting to them. Where does, just hypothetically saying this, and this is going to be probably the most absurd question of all questions, but could it be that we were placed here, we were put here on this planet by some phenomenon other than what a lot of people believe to be God or Jesus Christ, by some possibly aliens or another life form, brought us here, wrote the book, which is, what people would call their version of the Bible, and then to keep us from going rogue or going, and destroying ourselves and say, okay, we're going to put this here and here's what's going to happen. They're going to follow this book to keep themselves within line, the 10 Commandments, things of that nature. Do you believe that there may be some tie to religion and UFOs, UAPs, and other life forms that may be outside of our, this is not good for church business. And, please, Lord, if this question is crazy, don't come for me. But I ask because could this be that because we're so locked into our little world of being here on this little planet called Earth, that it could be a possibility?
Well, for those who are religious, what I'm about to say may seem a little heretical. I'll give a heresy here. I think religious phenomena are too important. Religion is too important to be left to religions. Namely, I think the UFO experience is religious in the deepest sense. Not that it necessarily verifies what's in the Bible or in established religions, but is of the same kind of phenomena, same kind of events that these books, the Bible, the books of the Bible, especially the Old Testament, the books of Buddhism, Hinduism. Right. But see, you've got to expand the maps considerably. And when you look at multiple traditions, what was Ezekiel's wheel? What was the wheel that Ezekiel saw? Yeah. I'm not saying, oh, he really saw a UFO. No, that would be a confusion of two frames of reference. The modern UFO frame of reference for describing things is different from. It's a way to describe things that might have been seen in the Bible as well. So Ezekiel's wheel was seen by Ezekiel. The burning bush what was the burning bush? What happened to St. Paul on the road to Damascus? They're called miracles, or they're moments of transformation when something big appears, usually to a prophet, somebody who goes on to become a prophet, because they tell the story and they are assumed to have the full story about everything. Joseph Smith in the Latter-day Saints paid a big price for his own claims to extraordinary phenomena. So I think, yeah, you could say the abductions are an extreme form of religious phenomenon. What do religions speak of? They speak of gods very often coming from the sky. We think of God in the heavens. Right. So the celestial framework is exactly where UFOs are situated, although we now have some growing evidence that UFOs are seen coming in and out of bodies of water. But in any case, yeah, I think you could say that this is a kind of religious phenomenon, and maybe the reason it isn't recognized as religious is because it appears in a form that feels like it's high tech. Also, we are to a large extent a secular society, a kind of post-religious society. It doesn't mean there aren't many religious people in our midst, but the overall worldview now is sort of beyond religion for many people. So what happens to someone who has a religious experience but doesn't have a religious framework? It would be easy then to explain it in terms of extraterrestrial. So these are some of the mysteries that you really enjoy unraveling when you poke more deeply into these sightings.
Keith, it's interesting that, listening to you, you're blowing my mind. To me, it's a great conversation this evening being shared of things that are more of like investigated, researched, not more like, hey, by the way, I had this. And it's refreshing to me to have someone on to really go down who said, look, this is what I've done for such a long time. I've done the footwork. I've investigated. I've done my research. Here's what we are providing for evidence. And this is what's great about this. And I can't wait to finish reading the book. Here's something that also intrigues me about a lot of things. And I know that the world is so connected nowadays with cell phones and, video cameras, and us being able to have this conversation via the internet. And what's interesting is when you go back and you start to go back in time, and we're going to take let's go back and take the US phenomenon time machine and go back to when there was nothing. There was the Mayans and the Incas and these pyramids that got built. And you talk about the pyramids that were built, and the Giza pyramids, and these pyramids over in Mexico. Like, it's crazy to me that I'm like, okay, wait a second here. Time out. Like, hey, it's not like they picked up the phone and said, hey, by the way, let me take a selfie of our pyramid and send it over to you. Like, it's quite interesting to me to think that how in the hell were these pyramids built? Now, I know they're like, could this be another phenomenon that related to, another, like some type of phenomenon, an alien who said, hey, here's the math and here's the science. Here's what it is. Or was it really that we were so advanced at one point in time of our lives that when we were wiped off the planet that we had to start all over again? So I ask you this because of your connection with your book here.
Well, I will say a good researcher is one who knows the limits of his own thinking. So I will say you're moving into ancient archaeology now.
Sure.
And it's important it's just not a field I know really well, but I do know that Graham Hancock is one researcher who is putting forward original thinking, empirically based, evidence-based. It doesn't mean the evidence is 100% accurate, but that isn't what evidence is. Evidence is support for a thesis, and then you evaluate the evidence. Does it stand up? And does it stand up according to what? To what criteria? But in any case, have we had continents that are lost? Did Atlantis or something like Atlantis exist? And what is the mystery? What are the pyramids? How did they get there? And another is the cryptology field, the cryptids, the Bigfoot phenomenon. I am not a Bigfoot researcher, and I don't say that because I'm trying to put the Bigfoot people down. It's just that It's just that I don't know. I don't know that body of evidence very well. But I do know that there are frequently Bigfoot or wolfman type figures seen in vicinities.
Sure.
So it points to a larger, you call it a meta phenomenon, a super phenomenon that distributes all sorts of a local phenomenon. You can have Bigfoot. Your people get some Bigfoot experience. You get saucers.
Right.
You get this. And by that, you get means the Jacques Vallée is a researcher who was one of the first to surface the story back in the early 1970s, late 1960s, of a larger perspective for all of this. He feels that the UFO phenomenon, rather than being strictly extraterrestrial, as we might think, is in fact the latest manifestation of a larger phenomenon, a larger intelligence that is in some sense controlling or shaping the human belief system by exposing human beliefs to something that is just outside our framework, just outside. For example, the whole idea of recovered spacecraft can be back engineered. That would suggest, well, it's close enough to what we know that we can glean from its, the saucers are out here, that the technology that's recovered stands here. Our knowledge stands here. So we try to close the gap. Can we figure out enough about that? And the idea that it has been reverse engineered suggests that it's close enough to what we know. But on the other hand, take a look at this idea. Imagine taking a cell phone into the Amazon and you find the one tribe that has had no human contact, and you agree to make contact, and you give them a cell phone and say, this is for you, good luck.
Yeah.
How would they begin to back engineer that? So while it's tempting and encouraging, and there's a certain solace that comes from, yeah, we've got the craft. McDonnell Douglas has them. We've got to make them reveal what they've got, because, or have we already back engineered it? And are we using it ourselves? It's a nice mythology, but it's also possible that whatever would be recovered would be so far beyond our ability to make sense of.
Our guest, as we get close to wrapping things up, Kenneth Thompson, the author of the UFO Paradox, the Celestial and Symbolic World of UAP. I want to finish on this note. Go get the book. I'm excited to finish reading or listening to this because I don't have time to read anymore. I swear, if you're going to do a podcast, a radio show, and produce it all yourself, it takes a lot of work. I want to end on this note here. Let's talk about the disclosure initiative about the Rockefeller piece. I want maybe give some insight to that for us.
I'll give a little background. Around what year was it now? 1993, I think. I was already known for my work in this field. I'd written some material. Let me pause about that date. I'm not quite sure. Right. But I get a phone call one day, and it was from the office of Lawrence Rockefeller, the philanthropist from New York City, from the great family, the Rockefeller family. I knew that he had an interest in the UFO phenomenon, but I didn't know why he'd be calling me. So he was planning to put together a meeting at his family ranch in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, to bring together leading researchers. He'd chosen me to participate, with the idea of pitching the then still new Clinton administration. Bill and Hillary were both known to be interested. They both had told their supporters, we're going to try to get to the heart of this. We want to know what they are too. So long story short, the group decided to pitch, could you release the material on Roswell? Let's keep it narrow. And the people who were surrounding President Clinton did express interest. They were surprised to hear that the story was the evidence was as good as it seemed to be. And so, long story short, they made an inquiry, and the Pentagon came back with, we don't have anything on Roswell that is different from what has been told. So it was an example of an attempt to get to the heart of the Roswell story and not succeed.
Our guest this evening, Keith Thompson, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for so much for blowing my mind this evening, taking me on a celestial adventure outside of the paradox of, my own studio. But man, it's what a great gift for us. If they want to find your book, you can get it on all kinds of different platforms. I'm listening via through Pam. What is it? Amazon. I've gone through there. I also have it on Audible as well, is where I'm listening to. They can buy it on Amazon, a copy of it as well. We'll have links within the podcast if you're a subscriber to the podcast. If you're not and you're listening via the radio show, the terrestrial radio stations, I would say go to your favorite podcasting platform and search for U.S. Phenomenon with Mario Magana. Keith, as we wrap things up here, any parting words to the average person who may be out there that is just the biggest skeptic?
Well, I would make a quick distinction between a skeptic and a debunker. I'm a skeptic. I'm a true skeptic. I think you are too. I mean, someone says this is true. My first response is, oh, okay, that's interesting. How could I find that out? How could I verify that? How did you know that? How did you learn that's true? Could I have a look at your evidence? Could I see it? In other words, is it something that could be confirmed by anybody who has the same evidence? That's the gold standard of science. To be a skeptic doesn't mean you're caustic or dismissing or rude. That's the debunker. The debunker is the one often claims to be a skeptic, but then will engage in character assassination and dismissal and ridicule and scorn. So as for people who are open, I would say be open-mindedly skeptical. Be skeptical of claims, but be open to the possibility there's more here going on. There's a Zen master in the Zen Buddhist tradition named Suzuki Roshi. His title was Roshi. And so Suzuki Roshi had a truism, a parable, if you will, an aphorism, in which he said, in the beginner's mind are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. So if you're an expert, you know it all. You know there's not many possibilities left. You've got it all figured out. His advice was always be a beginner. Stay with beginner's mind. There's things we don't know, but keep open to the possibility that there's more than we know. But don't believe anything either. There's no need to believe anything without evidence, but don't rule it all off the table in advance by claiming that you're an expert. Our society reinforces a certain kind of expertise. Oh, I can tell you there's nothing to that.
Right.
You could just right there, the haughty, scornful, wouldn't want to take the opposite position now, would you? If somebody with authority said, well, that's not real, it takes courage to say, well, actually, I experienced it, and so did he, and so did he. It's very easy to shut down when the authority figures say, this is where we're all dealing all the time with the government.
Nothing to see here, move along. Nothing to see here, move along.
Nothing to see here, people. Return to your little lives. We've got it all under control. Goodbye.
Right. Our guest this evening, Keith Thompson. What a pleasure. Thank you so much. We'll have all the links provided, available on the podcast for my entire team. Jeff, Jen, Sophia Magana, Mark Christopher, and Sophia Magana, obviously, and myself, Mario Magana. Be sure to look up at the sky, because you never know what you might see. Good night.
The Northwest home for paranormal. You're listening to US Phenomenon with your host, Mario Magana.